suppose you think that there is a lesion, there is an abnormality, and this is not functional, then you have to know where is the lesion. That is the anatomy of the lesion. So as I said, the same the condition, I will just show you with some examples. Where is the lesion also will vary depending on the constellation of symptoms and signs, and not just only on one symptom. And depending on how the lesion, how the symptom has come and progressed, you will have to decide what is the lesion. It's acute onset, then it may be a stroke. It's a sudden onset of hemiparesis with aphasia can be a stroke. It can also occur in a patient with a tumor who has had blood into the tumor. Then that patient will be having a history of headache which has been going on earlier. So it is very, very important in neurology to get a detailed history before you do a focused examination. Neurological history taking and examination will take time. When you begin, it will be about 1 to 1.5 hours. Later on, it becomes, when a consultant level, it is 15 minutes for the new patient and 10 minutes for the old patient. But before that, you have to have a detailed history, so you know what condition you should have an approximate differential diagnosis in your mind. Only then you can ask for appropriate investigations and go plan with the treatment management. Next slide, please.
1 second.
Next slide, please. Yeah.
Ma'am, just hold on a second.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, ma'am.
Okay. As I said, this is an acute focal neurological deficit will be a cerebrovascular accident or stroke. Strokes can occur in any part of the nervous system. It can affect the cortex, can produce a subcortical region, can affect the basal ganglia, can affect the internal capsule, can affect the brain stem, can affect the cerebellum. Strokes can also occur in the spinal cord lesion. Okay? So the different sites of involvement can be there. So constellation of symptoms and signs will help us to localize. That's an acute condition. When you come to subacute conditions, many things can be a subacute onset and progressive. It's a STH or the subdural hemorrhages after trauma. It can be acute, it can be subacute, it can be chronic. What I have written here is the subacute combined degeneration of the cord. This is secondary to a vitamin B12 deficiency where the cord gets affected, can produce paresthesias and weakness. Chronic conditions are one which occur and progress slowly, which is there for many months to years. That is chronic. An example of a chronic disorder will be Parkinson's disease. Have you seen Parkinson's disease?
Yes, ma'am.
So what are the conditions you have seen? Parkinson's, stroke, multiple sclerosis you have seen?
Multiple sclerosis, I have not seen, ma'am. I don't know if any of my batchmates have seen.
Okay. Sometimes the conditions can come and go. That is recurrences and relapses. This can occur when the brain and the spinal cord is involved. That is known as multiple sclerosis. Sometimes it can affect the muscles. When this, you know, it is a hypokalemic periodic paralysis or the HPP. When the potassium goes down, the patient can develop weakness. That occurs in certain conditions. I am not going to the details of that now. Then the progression of the disorder can be very fast. Like in a stroke, it progresses rapidly. Within 24 hours, you can have full deficit. Or it can be slow, like cerebellar ataxia, degenerative disease, Parkinson's. It can be slowly progressive, dementia, Alzheimer's. Or sometimes can be acute onset and static also. In some strokes, it will be acute onset. After that, they stabilize. But occasionally, the strokes can progress up to 5 days also. So all these have to be taken in the history. Very important to go through a detailed history analysis in neurology. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Here you can see the right eye of the patient has got partial ptosis. Okay. So what are the conditions it can occur? You can have this in a diabetic third nerve palsy, oculomotor nerve palsy. Can occur in stroke. Can occur in myasthenia. Can occur in thyroid disorders. So many conditions can produce it. It can occur even in brachial plexus lesions. Are you able to appreciate the ptosis on the right side of the patient?
Yes, ma'am.
The eye is partially closed. Okay, go to the next slide, please. So this is a lady who had a brachial plexus lesion. You can see she also has ptosis on the right side. But why did I say it's a brachial plexus lesion? You can see her hand is wasted. The forearm is wasted. She had a trauma to the neck. She fell down off the bike and she was trying to pull a pull a bar or something to stabilize herself. So she developed a brachial plexus lesion, because of which the sympathetic system was involved, and she's got a partial ptosis, which is the Horner's in her. Okay. So I have showed you, one is a diabetic retinopathy, this is a brachial plexus. Both can produce ptosis. So you have to go into the history and the finding. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is what I have already written there, facial palsy. But why did I put two faces? The one on the right, the girl's face, has got a right facial palsy, where you can find the right palpebral fissure is widened, right nasolabial fold is not well made out, and the angle of the mouth is deviated to the left with prominent left nasolabial fold. Am I visible on the video or not?
Ma'am, actually, I'm sharing the screen, so I can't see you, ma'am.
See,
I'll
okay,
ask somebody else.
No, because I thought if I show, you will be able to see it. Okay. So the patient on the left has got a reduced nasolabial fold on the left side, but his eye palpebral fissure is wider on the left side. So he has a partial left facial palsy. So one can be a lower motor. The girl has got a lower motor neuron right palsy. The other man has got an upper motor neuron right facial palsy. So same facial palsy can occur in different sites, can have different manifestations. Next slide, please. Okay, this you can see both their tongues are deviated to the right. The clue in the lady on the right side with the bald head is her bald head. Why is it a clue? Because many of the chemotherapeutic agents produce hair loss. She had a carcinoma breast. She had undergone chemotherapy. She had brain metastasis, because of which radiotherapy has given. She had metastasis in her hypoglossal nerve, because of which she has developed a right hypoglossal palsy, and the tongue is deviated to the right, left hypoglossal palsy, and tongue is deviated to the right. This other girl was having an idiopathic 12th nerve palsy. You have to ask them to move the tongue to find out how it is, whether the other side is normal, or you have to look into the tongue when it is inside the cavity of the mouth. Next slide, please. Okay. This boy here has ringing of scapula. The one which is on the left side shows him at rest. Both these scapula are very prominent. When he presses against the wall, you can see the prominence becomes much more. And next slide shows that one at the bottom shows what happens when he stretches out the hand. This winking can occur again in many conditions, can affect when it's a 11th cranial or the spinal accessory is involved. Can occur in syringomyelia, which is a cavity in the spinal cord. It can occur in anterior horn cell disease, which is a slowly progressive disorder. So all of them can have this similar manifestations. So you go through in this boy, probably with a normal hairline and with no sensory, I would think this boy has got an anterior horn cell disease, something like a spinal muscular atrophy. Next slide, please. Okay, this man's posture is very characteristic for a left hemiparesis. The left upper limb is abnormally placed, and his fingers are in abnormal posture, showing a hemiplegic dystonic posturing. Similarly, his left leg also is an abnormal posture. These can be identified when the patient enters the room of your OP itself. This, along with the history, this must be going on for some time to have this problem. But this hemidystonia can occur in other conditions also. This is post-hemiplegic dystonic posturing. Can also occur. You can also have dystonia in very many other conditions. So you should get a detailed history and then assess the patient. Next slide, please. Okay. I gave a brief introduction on the importance of different aspects of the nervous system. You definitely have to a very detailed examination, starting with the higher functions. That's the cognitive function. You have the mental status examination. All this is given in your Harrison itself, and I think also the Hutchinson Hunter. If that helps us to do a rapid assessment on the mental status of the patient. Following this, you do the cranial nerves 1 to 12. But depending on, if suppose the patient has a 12th nerve palsy, then you may not be testing the smell in that patient unless they complain of loss of smell. Now, loss of smell, you have to add one other condition, that is a corona also. Earlier, it was not there in that. So, if the patient complains of blurred vision, then you may have to check the second nerve, the third, fourth, and the sixth, because diplopia also can produce a blurring of vision. Blurred vision can occur in other conditions of the eye also. So those things will have to be checked. 3, 4, 6 is you do a eye movement examination, look at the palpebral fissure, look at the pupil, and then see what happens, whether there's diplopia or anything else. Then 5th, now you check the sensations over the face. And you also ask them to open and close the mouth against resistance and against side to side. That will help us to identify the motor fifth. 7th nerve palsy, the rapid examination will be elevating the forehead, closing the eyes slightly, pursing the lips, showing the teeth and blowing the cheeks out, and also the platysma. When you ask them to invert the lower lip, they will go in for the platysmal contraction. Coming to the 8th, it's audiology. I'm not going to that. 9th and 10th is for the swallowing. Check the palatal, ask the patient to say look at the palatal movements, whether they're equal on both the sides or they're occurring differently, or whether it is slow. Then you go in for the palatal and the pharyngeal reflexes. Coming to 9th and 10th, together we do vagus, because we do not test other things separately, except that you may have to, when there's a problem with the vagus, you may have autonomic disturbance, and that condition you have to test autonomic function separately. I think at this point of time, it is not needed for you. Coming to the 11th nerve, it's a spinal accessory. You test the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius. 12th is the movement of the tongue. Then comes the motor system. Rapid assessment has to be done. You have to check the power in the upper limbs, the proximal shoulder abduction, and then you can have the hand grip testing. And the lower limb, you can ask the patient to walk, elevate the limbs against the gravity, and toe movements and foot tapping. Okay, this is a rapid assessment. And if there is a sensory symptom, you have to go into the detailed sensory checking. Otherwise, you can check the distal parts of the extremities and the face. And then coming to the reflexes, you have to check all the reflexes very well. With a spinal cord or a brainstem lesion or a cortical lesion, definitely check the regular reflexes. Biceps, triceps, supinator, knee jerk, ankle jerk. These are the deep tendon reflexes. In addition, you may have to check the release reflexes also, which may be palmomental, which can be a rooting, grasping reflex. The superficial reflexes, you check apart from palatal pharyngeal, you check the abdominal and the plantar. Plantar extension of the great toe with fanning of the other toes is known as the Babinski sign. So cerebellar system, you check for coordination of the limbs, all the 4 limbs, then make the patient stand, check for the stance. Make the patient sit, see whether the patient is steady while sitting and standing. Okay, and also speech. Then extrapyramidal is you check for the speed of the movement. Speed, and then see whether there is a mask-like phase, reduced in the blink rate, increased in tone with this rigidity. Okay, spinal cord, you check the sensory level. And then if there's a bladder involvement, you have to do a detailed assessment. Okay, this is the rough neurological examination. Why did I choose to go into stroke? Because as you can see from the slide, stroke is a life-changing event, not only for the patient, but for the whole family. Suddenly, if one person in the family develops, imagine if one of your friends or your friend's parent develops a stroke, which is an hemiplegia colloquially, what will happen? He can't move. Sometimes he cannot speak, depending on the site of involvement. So even to get up to go to the toilet will become an issue. They don't know what to do. And that can produce death depending on the site of involvement. The disability is very high. 30% of the stroke patients get disabled. That is almost 1 in 3. And imagine with our 1.5 million new strokes in a year, 5.5 million strokes, so 50 lakh people will be getting disabled every year. And that produces a lot of expense for the family. And then nowadays the incidence is increasing even in the younger age group because of the stress. Hypertension, diabetes are occurring in the younger population. Smoking and alcohol are also there, adding on to all that. So please go to the next slide. Next slide, please. So every 6 seconds, somebody develops a stroke. And this is a very common disorder you will be seeing in your practice. And I think they also keep hemiplegia as a long case in neurology. And as I said, that hypertension, type 2 diabetes are the highest of risk. They can produce myocardial infarction and stroke. Next slide, please. What is stroke? It's a focal neurological deficit caused by disruption of the cerebral circulation. This disruption can be a block in the vessel, or a clot can arise elsewhere and then block the vessel in the brain, or it can produce a disruption of the blood vessel leading to hemorrhage in the brain. All these will produce stroke. Next slide, please. Okay, what are these 5 warning signs of stroke? It is very important. Why I took this is, as you're all final year students, patients and others around you and your family will be asking you on different aspects of, they'll suddenly ring you up and tell the patient is not able to speak, not able to use one side, case is gone crooked, what shall I do? And if you think the patient has a stroke, patient has to be referred immediately to a center which has facilities for CT scan. I'm repeating again, stroke is very important. Time is of great importance in stroke, as we'll be seeing the next few slides. They have to be referred to a center which has CT scan facilities, so CT scan can be done, and if necessary, thrombolysis can be initiated, because giving thrombolysis early reduces the deficit at the end of 3 months. That means the deficit will be much lesser with thrombolysis than without thrombolysis. It is our duty to send the patient immediately to that center rather than tell them go get a scan and then come and see me. So you are the ones who are going to become house surgeons next year. So it's very important that you know how to deal with it when you are sitting in the casualty and seeing a patient with a stroke. So what are the warning signs? Can be weakness on one side of the body, can be difficulty in seeing, it can be double vision, it can be dizziness. When dizziness is associated with diplopia, dysphagia, dysarthria, limb weakness or paresthesia, then you think it's a posterior circulation stroke. Not all dizziness produce stroke. Then can be just headache, acute headache, can be a subarachnoid hemorrhage. They can have dysphagia, that is trouble speaking. They can also have dysarthria, where there is trouble articulating. So all these are warning signs. Sometimes these signs come and go away when you call it as a transient ischemic attack or TIA. Next slide, please. So as I said, when the strokes, you divide it into 2 major types, the ischemic strokes and hemorrhagic strokes. Hemorrhagic strokes, depending on the type, whether it's a cortical hemorrhage, subcortical hemorrhage, subarachnoid hemorrhage or intraventricular hemorrhage, you will deal with it. So I'm not going to deal with that aspect now. I'm going to deal only with the ischemic stroke. Again, ischemic stroke is now divided into arterial strokes and venous strokes. Venous strokes is mainly because of cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. I'm just mentioning this so that you should know. I don't think they keep these patients for you for exam. So it's arterial stroke which we have to concentrate on, because it's here we make a lot of difference. It can be a thrombotic stroke where the clot arises in the vessel wall itself, like the middle cerebral artery can produce occlusion. It can be embolic stroke where the clot can arise from the heart and spread into the brain vessels. Or it can be a transient ischemic attack, as already said, some reduction in blood supply to one particular area, which then normalizes. Subsequently, again, they can have that and can produce a stroke. Next slide, please. Okay, as I said, the hemorrhagic stroke is very less. It's only 12%. They improve very well. Otherwise, there's a lot of problems in the guy. That's a different issue. So 88% are ischemic strokes. In that, the main cause will be atherosclerotic cerebrovascular disease and the small vessel disease. These two put together will account for about 45%. So what do I mean by this? Okay, this occurs, you know that there are different risk factors for stroke. You have the modifiable and non-modifiable. The non-modifiable risk factors are the age, above 60 years, sex, male sex, in females, postmenopausal females, and then family history of stroke. These are non-modifiable risk factors. What are the modifiable risk factors? Hypertension, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, smoking, alcohol. These are some of the modifiable risk factors which, if treated appropriately, can reduce the incidence of stroke. Okay. So what is a cardiac stroke? Cardiac stroke can occur when there is some clot, like in the LA clot, or some subacute bacterial endocarditis. Cryptogenic strokes are strokes where you cannot find the etiology in about 30% of the patients. There's a large, almost 1/3 of the ischemic strokes. You may not be able to find any cause of the stroke when you see them. Others, like vasculitis, will be 3%. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So stroke should be considered as a brain attack. Like an hello. Hello. No, please. No. Yeah. Previous slide, please. Previous slide. Yeah. Stroke should be considered as a brain attack and you have to act fast. Okay. Similar to a heart attack. I think it's better to call it a brain attack. Next slide, please. Okay, what is this FAST? Remember FAST, F-A-S-T, that's mnemonic. F is for face. Is there a difference between the facial appearance between the two sides? Face is uneven. Then A is for arm, arm drift. One arm is the right upper limb in this lady is coming down. That is known as arm drift. Third is S is for speech. This dysarthria or dysphagia. T is for time. You have to call the ambulance immediately. Ours is 108 and not 911. Okay. So this is fast. This you should remember. Fast, fast, fast. Next slide, please. Okay. This is the scan of a stroke patient. Yeah. Just above the marker, you can see that bright vessel, which is like a rod or like a rope there. That is known as the dense middle cerebral artery sign. I'm just showing it to you. I'm not going into the details. I know you will be needing neuroradiology separately. This is just for you to know that this blood vessel is blocked. It is not yet produced infarction. It will produce infarction. And in the next picture of the same slide, you can see one dot in that. No, it is a dot in the, I think you have to move to your right. Yeah, that's a dot. Yeah, just above the marker is the dot. That is known as the dot sign. These are early signs of stroke which tell you that you have to intervene immediately to reduce the disability. Next slide, please. Okay, you can see this bright one, white images in the posterior part of the scan on the left side. That's a cerebellar stroke. Both the cerebellar hemispheres are affected. This is an acute stroke affecting the cerebellum. In association, you're seeing this black, like two commas, black ones just above that. These are the ventricles which are enlarged. Just above, can you move the pointer? No. Those two black round ones, they are ventricles. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the ventricles which enlarge. So this obstructed the fourth ventricle, produced hydrocephalus. This is a MRI picture. As you compare it with the CT scan next, the CT scan did not show anything in that patient. Only the MRI picked up the stroke. Next slide, please. Okay, these are few other strokes. The first one, you can see these white bright objects. The first scan on the left, yeah, you can see those white bright dot-like things. These are watershed infarct. What is watershed? It's between the anterior circulation and the posterior circulation. There is a zone which has less of blood supply. That is known as a watershed zone. It can get affected when there is a drop in blood pressure. That is known as watershed zone infarct. Okay. And the next slide on top has got that white bright images. White bright ones. Can move the pointer towards that white bright ones. They are infarct. Here it is affecting the opercular region. Opercular, not down. Next image, this white tube light like bright images. Yeah, that's right. So this is known as the opercular syndrome. That is different, where they have difficulty in doing what we command them to do. They may not have an hemiparesis, but they have difficulty in following commands. They may do voluntarily, but not to command. Okay, come down to the left bottom image. Left bottom image, third row, second image. Yeah, that white one is the occipital lobe infarct. You can see that white one, occipital lobe infarct. It usually produces a visual field defect where patient will say he is bumping into objects, not able to walk properly. There will be problems with driving. Coming to the left, to the right bottom image, you're seeing lot of black round stuff. They are known as the microhemorrhages. These occur in patients who have risk factors of stroke. If the number is increasing, then they can go in for major hemorrhages. You have to be very careful. Next slide, please. Okay, before we go into these guidelines for stroke management, I would like to know whether you understood what I've said so far or you have any doubt. Pida, can you unmute them? If there's anything they can ask.
Oh, yes, ma'am, I'll tell them.
They can do it one by one.
Anyone has a doubt, please unmute yourself and ask. Rahul?
Yeah, Fiza.
Yeah, people can unmute themselves, right?
Yes, they can unmute.
Okay.
If any doubts so far, they can ask me before I proceed with the management guidelines.
Ma'am,
Ma'am,
Niray has one doubt.
Pardon? One by one, you can modulate. Yeah.
Niray?
ma'am,
Yes,
actually warning signs of stroke means weakness and vision problem and all, ma'am. The normal people also get these kind of things, and how we differentiate between this is the warning signs of stroke or this is normally produce these vision problems and
Said a
problems.
very detailed history is very important. Sudden acute onset will be stroke. As I said, the visual problems can occur in a retinal hemorrhage, also can be loss of vision. If the blood supply, the central retinal artery occluded also, there can be loss of vision. If the carotid is occluded also, there can be loss of vision. So that is where the history becomes important. History and physical findings become important. In multiple sclerosis also, they can have blurred vision and loss of vision when they have a retrobulbar neuritis. So many conditions, this is where the same symptom can occur in different conditions, and different conditions can produce a similar symptom. So history is very important in differentiating all these.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome. Anything else? Or should I proceed?
Yes, ma'am. We can proceed.
yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. See, I want you to listen very carefully to these guidelines in management, because as a doctor, it is our role to give the best to our patient, to make the patient as good as possible, if not to that normal level. At least it's true, because the disability, 1/3 of those patients develop a lot of disability. They're dependent on somebody in the family. The whole family gets disrupted, not only mentally, physically, financially. Imagine you're having one person at home who has to be looked after by a nurse 24 hours. The minimum per month charge for the nursing will be about 45,000 rupees, apart from the drugs. Apart from other things, diapers and everything will cost, trials tube, bladder catheter, bladder bag, everything is money. So you have to give the best to the patient to make the patient up and about and get back to as normal as possible. So this should be the goal, and this is why I'm taking this, because as house surgeons, it is you will be the first person of contact in the casualty. When you see a person with acute stroke, you have to take an immediate decision, not wait for somebody else to give you instructions. If the casualty medical officer is not there, you call, you tell that acute stroke is there, I want a CT scan now first. Okay, then you can do the rest. Do one rapid neurological examination and then proceed with the CT. Go into the next slide, please. You may be seeing lot of conditions. You can click 3-4 times, you'll get all those round ones there. An animated slide. Yeah, one more round. One more. Oh, yeah, done. No. Go, yeah, okay. So you may get a lot of conditions in which you may not make much difference, like a degenerative disease. But stroke is one condition where you can definitely make a difference and feel proud to make a difference. You're a doctor, you have to make a difference. Okay. So the normal blood supply to the brain will be about 40 to 60 ml per 100 grams of tissue. Okay. When that comes down to less, 20 to 40, why would it come down? Because there's a obstruction in the blood supply to the brain. Can be in the anterior circulation, which is the carotid circulation, which bifurcates as the anterior cerebral artery, carotid artery, common carotid artery bifurcates into an external carotid and internal carotid. Internal carotid artery in turn again bifurcates into an anterior cerebral and the middle cerebral artery. The two vertebral arteries join together for the basilar artery, which again bifurcates into two posterior cerebral arteries. I think you're all familiar with the circle of Willis, where all these anterior and posterior circulation join together in the circle of Willis. So when any of this circulation is affected, the normal blood supply gets reduced to the region whichever is affected. Okay, if the posterior circulation is affected, the occipital lobe gets affected. Anterior circulation is affected, the frontal lobes can get affected. Very easy to remember. The frontal lobe is mainly motor, the temporal lobe is mainly auditory speech, the parietal lobe is mainly sensory and thing. It makes a man a gentleman and woman a lady. Okay, and the occipital lobe is mainly visual. So depending on the region of affection, the symptoms will occur. When it comes down to 20 to 40, you know that there's a reduction in blood supply. When you find a patient with carotid stenosis, you have to be careful. If there's a critical stenosis, or if the patient, all know what is a stenosis, there's a narrowing of the vessel. There's a narrowing of the vessel, the blood supply is going to go down. So you have to intervene at that level. If you do not have it, and then patient comes to you with heavy paresthesis, See, you will find when you do a scan, the two regions. One region, which is called projection, but it is not yet gone fully. It has produced some change, but it can be reversed. That is what is the penumbra. That is when the blood supply is between 12 ml and 20 ml per 100 grams per minute. When it goes below 12, then it goes for ischemia and infarction. Infarction becomes permanent. Even many years after the stroke, the patient will be showing signs of infarct in the scan. So you cannot take it as an acute one. Next slide, please. Next slide. So what do you do? The pre-hospital management. Whenever somebody calls and the casualty and the ambulance is going, you have to tell that ambulance, because they will have said that patient is got like this, is it a stroke? So you tell the ambulance person to transport the patient as soon as possible for them to check the BP, the pulse, the blood sugar, and oxygen saturation. The oxygen saturation is less, they have to give a supplement with oxygen. If the sugar is less than 40, then they have to give some 50% dextrose and correct the sugar. Sugar is very high, they have to give some insulin and then transport the patient to the hospital. Usually this should be done within about 10 minutes. And they should inform the emergency room physician or surgeon that they're bringing the patient. So you can all be ready to receive the patient, like how they show in that house. I hope you're seeing those house, the doctor series on the Netflix, where they show how it has to be actually done like that. Many of the private hospitals are doing like that. The government hospitals, still there, because of lack of people, we still do not follow this every time. Next slide, please. Okay. So first is the ABC of anything. Stabilize the airway. Make sure the oxygen saturation is all right, and then patient is breathing well. If the patient is not breathing well, you feel something is obstructed, put in a endotracheal tube. Keep the airway patent. Then identify, do a rapid examination. Ask the patient to show the teeth, close the eyes and open the eyes, put out the tongue, and then say ah, and then put out both the hands in front. If there's any drift of the arm, the one arm is coming down, that means that side is arm drift. Same way, ask the patient to stand and walk. If not, if the patient is not able to, ask them to elevate both the legs. One leg comes down, then that leg is weak. So these are all symptoms of stroke. So, and then you have to check the blood sugar and correct it. Do not administer glucose containing fluids, because that can worsen stroke. Next slide, please. These things are usually not taught, because they usually teach hemiplegia, site of location, but then this is what is going to make a difference. That is why I chose the subject of treatment, because this is very, very important for you to know at this stage. Next slide, please. Do you all have casualty postings? Ida?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you have casualty postings.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, fine, then I'm happy. So what do you do in emergency? Next slide, please. So as soon as the patient comes, you do a rapid, this is within 1 hour, all these have to be done. First, you do a rapid neurological assessment. As I already mentioned, that FAST is a rapid neurological assessment. It hardly takes 10 minutes. And then you have what is known as the NIHSS score. I will come into that later. You have the score which will help you to identify mild strokes from severe strokes. The severe stroke, you're not going to thrombolize. The very mild stroke, you're not going to thrombolize. Mild to moderate strokes in between only are going to thrombolize. When you think that patient have this, start 2 IV lines, one on either side. Okay? Just keep the lines patent. Take the blood. I will tell you what are the tests has to be done. Send the patient immediately for CT scan. Within 10 minutes, patient should be back from the CT scan room. Do only plain CT scan. No contrast CT scan in an acute stroke. So by 10 minutes before you get the report, you get the ECG done. By then, all your blood reports and the scan should be ready. The next 25 minutes, it all should be ready. And then you think that you're going, if you think that patient has got an ischemic stroke and patient is going to be thrombolized, you should put in the lines, like the IV lines, the catheter as well as the rails too, because otherwise all these poking may produce bleeding tendencies. Okay? And you see when the patient comes back from the CT, just check what has happened to the neurological status. The patient has improved, you're not going to thrombolize. The patient is worse and you have to thrombolize. Next slide, please. So what do you do? Investigations, what do you send? The complete blood counts, including a platelet count. Because platelet less than 1 lakh can produce bleeding tendencies, so you correct it and then only you can thrombolize. That may or may not occur in the next 4 to 5 hours. See, the thrombolysis time maximum is 4.5 hours for intravenous thrombolysis. Then you do sugar, urea, creatinine, electrolytes, make sure all these are normal. urea or creatinine are elevated, then the thrombolysis dosage will have to be adjusted. Prothrombin time and the APTT, which will let us know whether activated plasma transit time, that let us know whether we can thrombolize or not. ECG has to be done because it's going to be atrial fibrillation that could be the cause of stroke. Then urine pregnancy test, it depends. If it's needed, only you do, and a brain CT scan. Brain CT scan is done in acute phase only to rule out hemorrhages. Next slide, please. And that will be the first investigation of choice, not an MRI. Unless you have a center with the MRI where you can do everything within 20 minutes. You can do a CT brain with an MRI perfusion scan. Then you can know the mismatch. Or a diffusion weighted image and a CT perfusion scan will also be able to help us. The diffusion weighted image will show the extent of infarction. CT perfusion will show the extent where the hypoperfusion is there, where you can improve the circulation by thrombolysis. Next slide, please. Okay, the one on the left side, the one which shows a wedge-shaped cortical infarct. Okay, yeah, right. Pointer is lovely. Right on that infarct. That is an old one. That is why it appears so bright. Because in CT scan, the first 24 to 48 hours, you may not see anything abnormal if it's an infarct. Normal CT scan with an hemiparesis or hemiplegia does not mean patient does not have stroke. Patient can have a stroke and your CT can be normal in the 24 to 48 hours period. Okay, it is where such patients you may need an MRI. The second one, the white region pointed out already there, is the hemorrhage. That's the basal ganglia hemorrhage, very prone for hemorrhages. Okay, this can also produce a hemiparesis. The third one, where it is pointed out, is the region of edema, and just below that is the region of a tissue which has got a difference in the diffusion. Difference in the density. So this is got a pressure effect where the ventricle is pushed to the opposite side. You can see that black, dark black, it's like thick, that's the ventricle. Yes, right. The right side, the ventricle on the other side is come here. So there is a pressure and on the ventricle. This is a mass effect with the shift of the ventricle. So all the three conditions can manifest as stroke. So you have to differentiate with the scan what it is. Next slide, please. So what are the other mimics? Like one of you asked me earlier, peripheral vertigo, dizziness. Not all dizziness are strokes. Suppose you have a dizziness or a vertiginous sensation, which is mainly posture related, associated with the tinnitus, some hardness of hearing or ear discharge. That is a peripheral vertigo. Suppose this dizziness is associated with diplopia, double vision, dysarthria, difficulty in speaking, dysphagia, difficulty in swallowing, some one side unilateral paraparesis or paresthesia, then you know that this is going to be a brainstem stroke. So you have to differentiate it from the history. Migraine. Migraine is a unilateral headache which is associated with nausea, vomiting, photophobia, phonophobia. So it doesn't come into stroke mimics. Occasionally, migraine has got a component where you can have an hemiplegic migraine, where the patient can have all features of a stroke. Sometimes you have a retinal migraine where the vision can go away. You have the brainstem migraine or the ophthalmoplegic migraine where the eye movements can be affected. Here again, the history will help us. But again, we have to evaluate to rule out strokes, because giving a thrombolysis in a patient with migraine is not fault. But if it's a stroke, you're not thrombolizing, it's a fault. Seizures. After the seizure, the patient can have focal neurological deficits, which is known as a post-ictal palsy or the Todd's palsy. So that again, the history will help you. Metabolic disorders like hypoglycemia, it can produce symptoms very similar to stroke. If your blood sugar is 20 or 30, you correct the hypoglycemia, the symptoms improve. Okay. So these are some of the common stroke mimics which you should be able to identify. Next slide, please. Okay, what is the standard of care? Why am I talking about the standard of care? Because now we are becoming a medico-legal society. Nowadays, patients Google and come. So they will come and ask you about all this. Even if you're sitting in a government hospital OP, some of them may come like this. And then they'll ask, why is it not, you're not giving me the clot-busting drug? The clot-busting drug is nothing but the TPA. It's not the heparin, it is the TPA. What is TPA? I'll come to that. So what is this thrombolysis? Here you lysis, that is you break up the clot. Thrombus is the clot, you break it up in acute ischemic stroke, and that is done within 3 hours, preferably maximum of 4.5 hours. So that is why I said when the patient comes to the OP, within 1 hour you have to get everything and be ready for this thrombolytic therapy. This is known as the door to needle time. Next slide, please. Okay, why do we stress on this time? Time is brain, time is brain. Because as you can see, every minute's delay will cause the loss of 1.9 million neurons and 14 billion synapses. Synapses are very important for transmission of impulses and 7.5 miles of myelinated fibers. Suppose the patient comes 10 hours later, you can't do anything. Of course, now it's becoming a little different. Patient has already lost 8.3 trillion synapses. So, you know, the deficit is going to be quite severe. Next slide, please. This is why we are stressing on time is brain and on these reperfusion therapy. That is the reason I have taken this class today. What is RTPA? It's a recombinant tissue plasminogen activator. It is efficacious, that is, it is effective, and it is also cost effective. It is cost about 35,000. Even then, it is still cost effective because it reduces the severity as well as the disability of stroke. In the long run, it becomes cost effective. It is generally given within 3 hours. Nowadays, up to 4.5 hours, the time window has been extended. This is for intravenous RTPA. Suppose you are giving it as intra-arterial, then the time window is longer, 12 to 24 hours. So in 30 to 50% of the patients, as you can see, the disability at 3 months becomes nil or only minimal disability. That means patient can function independently, which is documented by the Rankin score. 0 to 1 means they have very good ability to perform well. This occurs only when you give the thrombolysis, when you do the thrombolysis very early. Thrombolytic therapy is known as reperfusion therapy. Next slide, please. The other reperfusion therapies also, we'll go into it later. Next slide, please. So how does this thrombolysis work? This, as I said, this RTPA is known as Altiplase. It promotes reperfusion, that is, it lyses the clot and improves the circulation, because of which that region of penumbra gets more blood supply, reduces the size of the infarction, and it improves the blood supply, and so there is improvement in the quality of life. Next slide, please. Okay, as you can see, what I said about the ischemia, the red box points you to the region of infarcted tissue. That is the core. What we are trying to do is, this light blue regions around that is the penumbra, where the perfusion is less, the blood supply is less, but still it can improve if you lyse the clot and improve the blood supply. When you do that, then it becomes a smaller infarct. The next picture it is shown. The infarct size comes down. Otherwise, this whole region in the first picture would be infarcted. After reperfusion, it's a much smaller region, as you can see. Next slide, please. That is the purpose of our talk today. As you can see from these slides, the one on the left, the white image is the infarcted one. Okay? The green one with the dark color, dark and the red mixed one, orange mixed one, is the region where there is perfusion is less. This is known as diffusion-perfusion mismatch. That is, the diffusion is the white one, which is infarcted, and this green one shows the perfusion less. So the difference between the two is a region where you can help by reperfusion. If you don't do it, weeks or days later, the next picture shows the region, that is that what you're seeing in the green, the whole thing becomes infarcted. As you can see from the previous slide, we can reduce that by giving a reperfusion therapy. Next slide, please. Okay, so our purpose is to reduce the infarction size and improve the quality of life. That is where this door to needle time becomes important. This is where the time is brain. Door to needle time has to be only 1 hour. Next slide, please. What does it mean? By the time you receive the patient in the emergency, to the time you administer the plasminogen, it has to be 60 minutes. Yes, it is possible. You have to have a mechanism in place where the ambulance will inform you previously. So you will be waiting at the entrance of your casualty to receive the patient, do a rapid neurological examination, send the blood for investigations, notify the stroke team, send the patient for CT scan, inform the radiologist patients coming for CT scan. You want a plain CT of the brain, and to get back to you within 20 minutes with the report. If the CT scan is not showing hemorrhage and patient has stroke, you have to thrombolyze. So by 45 minutes, you have to get all your blood reports ready. It is possible, it is done. I have done it as a visiting professor of neurology at GH, and we have got a good profile of thrombolysis there. So it is possible. I don't know in KMC whether you are thrombolizing. Are you thrombolizing at KMC? Are you using RTPA? Casualty? No? Frida? Rahul?
Ma'am, don't know, ma'am.
Don't know, ma'am.
You don't. Okay. Okay, that's okay. Next time you go there, you please find out whether they are doing it. Because it's time that you can start doing it. Many people are now not aware of their TPA. Casualty medical officers can be from different specialities. Okay? So, I don't know who's posted there, but I'm just telling, generally in casualty, people from different specialities are there. So, it's our duty to read up about the stroke. As youngsters, you all should know. Because whatever specialty you're going to go into in later life, people will call you when there's an acute, somebody known to you, your family, friends will call you when there's an acute problem. They call me, they will tell me that patient has got some rash, what shall I do? Okay, I am a neurologist, I'm not the dermatologist. Then I'll say you have to go to the dermatologist, and if like angioedema, no, they'll say all the lips are swollen, the tongue is coming out, patient took some tablet yesterday. I'll say you have to immediately go to an hospital for emergency access. Okay, so we will have to know other specialities also, at least to direct them to the correct place. Next slide, please. This is where door to needle time is helpful. Next slide, please. Okay, whatever I'm talking is what we are doing. I'm not talking so far, I'm not talking anything out of my hat. These are all being done in the private hospital where I go as well as in the government hospital where I work. So it is all possible in Chennai itself. Okay. So whom do you thrombolize? Preferably within 3 hours of ischemic stroke. Maximum is 4.5 hours. So you have to measure, and clinically you have to find out whether there's a deficit. I'll go into the scale later so you can score the deficit. And if the CT scan shows an infarct, it's okay. It should be less than 1/3 the MCA territory. As you saw in the previous MRI, there's a big territory. Less than 1/3, or if the CT is normal, then you can go in for a thrombolysis. CT scan does not show hemorrhage and there's a non-vascular stroke. Also, you can go in for thrombolysis when the patient is between 18 years and 80 years. Above or below that, you have to take an individual decision. Next slide, please. So time of onset is not known. Patient wakes up with a stroke. So you don't know. Patient got up at 6:30. Previously had gone to bed at 10 o'clock. So you don't know when the patient developed a stroke. So this patient may not be an ideal candidate for IV thrombolysis. Suppose the patient had woken up at 4 o'clock to go to the toilet. Was all right. 6:30 gets up with a stroke. Then you know it's only 2.5 hours. You still have 2 hours time for thrombolysis. So you may have to work up for thrombolysis. Suppose patient has a dense hemiplegia or patient is in coma. There's no purpose. Or if patient has a stroke and it's improving, then there is no need to thrombolyze. Seizures are at the onset. It's a relative contraindication. Hypertension, BP is more than 185 or more systolic or more than 110 diastolic. Give labetalol, reduce the BP to less than these figures, and then you can thrombolyze. Subarachnoid hemorrhage, if you have a strong suspicion of subarachnoid hemorrhage, and CT can sometimes be normal in a subarachnoid hemorrhage, produces a thunderclap headache. Then you have to be cautious. Don't do thrombolysis. If the PT INR is internationalized normal ratio is more than 1.5, don't thrombolyze. Platelet count less than 1 lakh, don't thrombolyze. Serum glucose less than 40 or 400, corrected before thrombolysis. Next slide, please. Okay, this is what I was telling. This is National Institute of Health Stroke Scale, NIHSS. This is all available in the net. Next slide, please. This is how we grade the scale. So this first assesses the level of consciousness. Depending on whether you are alert, drowsy, suppress, or coma, you give different points. Next is questions. You ask the patient to answer the question. Patient in a position to answers correctly, not correctly, or incoherent, then you grade accordingly. Then ask the patient to obey commands. Put out your hands, lift up your legs. Then you score accordingly. Then gaze. Ask him to look right, left, up, down. You see. Feels. Just check for whether peripherally any constriction of the field. See for facial paresis. Depending on whether it's normal, minor, partial, or complete, you have to score. Next slide, please. Scoring is given there. Then arms. Upper limbs right, left. Lower limbs right, left. No drift. Drift. Can't resist gravity. Like the 5 for power testing. Then ataxia. Whether there's some incoordination of the limbs. The 7th point. Again, it is all graded. Sensory is again graded. Then the language. The best language. ask the patient to name items, describe what has happened. You will be able to see whether there is aphasia or not. Dysarthria, again, you can see from the speech itself whether dysarthria is extinction and inattention. Usually we do not test. If the patient has a primary sensory loss, then it may be difficult. Otherwise, you have to check for neglect. Okay? Then you add the scores. You will come to a total score. And this can be kept as a baseline score to see the improvement. Next slide, please. So you will get a score where there's 0, no stroke. 1 to 4 will be minor strokes, maybe a little facial paresis, little arm drift. Moderate strokes will be much more. Hemiparesis, maybe power is only 3. And severe stroke will be an hemiplegia. Okay? This is what is the NIH score. This is how you grade it. For minor strokes less than 4 or severe strokes more than 21, don't thrombolyze. Okay? Normally 7 to 25, we do thrombolyze. Next slide, please. So what is this? As I said, the TPA, I call it TPA, it's a recombinant RTPA. R stands for recombinant tissue type plasminogen activator. So what is this fibrinolytic agent? This is one which activates the plasminogen. And as you all know, that gets converted to plasmin. And plasmin is the one which will break down the clots. Okay, because it degrades the fibrin, it breaks down the clots. TPA has got that property. It has a low affinity for plasminogen, but it has a high affinity for fibrin. So what happens is it binds to the fibrin and there's a clot breakdown. That is why it's known as a clot busting drug. And it rapidly gets converted to plasminogen and becomes very highly effective. Okay, if you're giving it locally, that is intra-arterial TPA. Next slide, please. This is how it is available. 50 milligrams, 49,000 rupees. They give it to you, the company gives it to you about 35,000 rupees at the concessional rate. Next slide, please. It's available in the government supply. The dose is 0.9 milligram per kg to maximum of 90 milligrams, even if it's 100 kg per. Okay, 10% of that you give as a bolus over 1 to 2 minutes. Watch for angioedema. Okay, no angioedema, no allergic reactions. Then you give the remainder over the next 1 hour, 60 minutes. And then you have to keep watching the vitals. Pulse, BP and oxygen saturation has been checked every 15 minutes for the first 2 hours, every half an hour till the next 6 hours, and then every 1 hour. And then you have to repeat a CT scan after 24 hours or earlier if necessary. Next slide, please. So what are the complications? As I said, anaphylaxis, angioedema can occur, can become life-threatening. Then 6 to 8% of the patients can develop intracerebral hemorrhage. You have to tell about this before you thrombolyze, because they will say patient came with that, now you have produced this. So you have to explain to them when you get, this has to be given only after obtaining consent. Consent has to be obtained from the patient if the patient is in a condition to give consent. That means if the patient is able to understand and say yes or no. Patient is not able to talk but can understand, then you can ask the patient to sign. If the patient is not able to sign, you can have a thumb impression as a consent. If the patient is not able to understand, then you have to get the consent from the next of kin. Okay, 6 to 8, because you have to explain that 6 to 8% of them can go in for cerebral hemorrhage and 3% can go in for anaphylaxis. Both of these will be life-threatening. Major hemorrhage is only, thankfully, only 0.4%. Most of the time we can we can manage the hemorrhage. Okay. So next slide, please. So this hemorrhagic conversion, when will it occur? The size of infarction is large. When you're giving it out of time, there's a big, when the high NIH score, when it's a cardioembolic stroke, then severe hypertension, which is not corrected. Okay, severe hypoglycemia, platelet count is low. So how do you correct that? 10 to 20 units of cryoprecipitate or FFP is given just according to the dose of the fibrinogen level. There's a good worked out model is available. If you need, we can use that. Next slide, please. Okay, what is intra-arterial fibrinolytic therapy? Here, the catheter is, suppose, the right MCS block. You do the Seldinger technique, where through the femoral artery, you go up through the thing, and then you go into the right MCA. Or you can do it with the radial artery also. And you administer the RTPA locally where there is a clot. The advantage here will be the higher concentration is available at the region where it needs, and systemic effects can be less. And you can do a gentle manipulation so that you can rupture the clot. If there's a microcatheter or a guide wire, you can also take away the clot. But you need a good radiology setup to do this, and a good competence of the person who can do the procedure. You can see the vascular anatomy and then decide depending on the collateral pattern. Next slide, please. Okay, what are the disadvantages? Sometimes when you manipulate the catheter, the clot can get discharged and go and block the vessel fully also, and the vessel can tear. And then intraarterial heparin administration also can you have to give before the catheter is put in. That can also delay a problem. Delay can produce sometimes very major issues. And angiography catheter positioning are very, very important. Delay in the steps to produce that can produce more strokes also. Technical expertise in cath lab are very, very important for a successful intraarterial thrombolysis. Whereas for intravenous, just a CT scan is sufficient. Next slide, please. So you can use a combination of IV and intravenous and intraarterial therapy also in certain situations. That will have to be decided by the neurologist, not by anybody else. Okay. Next slide, please. So antiplatelets, you all know aspirin and clopidogrel are the mainstays of treatment for stroke. We normally start off with this, but here, if you are going to thrombolyze a patient, these should be started 24 to 48 hours later, provided the second CT scan done after 24 hours does not show any hemorrhages. Okay, next slide, please. The dose of aspirin is generally 75 to 350 milligrams, and clopidogrel is 75 to 150 milligrams. Okay, all these are done normally. What I'm going to show next are not done in all the centers. These are done in only specialized centers. I think as students, you should know all those also. So these are all catheter-based devices. There you catheterize, go into the region where there is a clot, and you can dissolve the clot or extract the clot, take it away. And you can have catheters where this fibrinolyte therapy is at the tip, so that you can ultrasound guided also it can be done. And mechanical reperfusion like angioplasty and stenting also can be done. We'll go into that. And the endovascular thrombectomy means you put in a catheter and take away the clot. Next slide, please. It's a very exciting time for stroke because management is improving by leaps and bounds. A lot of research is going on. As you can see in this, from the common carotid, the catheter is going into the internal carotid. There is a filter on top, it is marked, and then you have a guide wire and you have a stent being released. And there's a plaque which is below the stent. So you go above you put in the catheter with the guide wire, go above the plaque. Put in a filter. So if the clot thing breaks also, it will not go. Filter will catch it. Put in the stent. So pull it a little down, put in the stent so that wherever there's a clot, the stent will open up. And then this filter will take away this thing, clot which occurs. And catheter can aspirate it. Okay? So this is the time where you can take away the clot with this. Next slide, please. There are different stents. Some are for only opening up. Some can retrieve the clot and open up. This is angioplasty. It's in the internal carotid artery. You put in a cross stent like a carotid angioplasty. So you put in a stent and you shunt the blood. You remove the clot and then you take away the shunt and the vessel is open. Reperfusion is there. Next slide, please. So then you have certain clot retrieval devices. The Mercy retriever is a very important one which people are using. We'll show you. I'll show you the next one without telling all this. We'll go to the next one. Next slide, please. Only then you will understand. So you can see the picture A shows the catheter with that blue one and the coiled one. Coiled one is the one which retrieves the clot, and the blue one is the one which sucks up, and the other one is the catheter. Okay. This what you do is you put it in and you pull it out slowly so that the clot gets aspirated and comes out. So this retrieves the clot. That's why it's known as a clot retriever. Can you understand? You can see in the middle image that there is a clot. The catheter is gone above it. That coiled portion is above it. And you can see in the B2 where the coiling is in the clot. And in the B3 you can see how it is taking away the clot and opening up the vessel. Okay. Next slide, please. So these are devices which are helpful for the clot retraction. And there are some devices which are helpful for improving the penumbra. Okay, penumbra is a region where there is less of blood supply, not absent. Okay, this is still the region where you can improve the blood supply and reduce the region of infarction. Yeah, and they have two mechanisms. One is aspiration and then extraction. It's a three-part device. One reperfusion catheter is there. Then there's a separator and a thrombus removal ring. So this thrombal material is aspirated from the vessel into the catheter lumen. and is maintained by a separate suction, that is separate. Thrombus removal ring is used to directly engage and remove the residual thrombus only if aspiration fails. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. This is something which is similar to a Mercy device, but in addition, it is also got this thing reperfusion catheter, which can produce a perfusion which is better. Next slide, please. So, coming to one of the last slides, it's very important to identify acute stroke and initiate appropriate management if the patient is within the time window for thrombolysis. Take control of the BP, control the sugar, control the risk factors. Antiplatelet drugs are the mainstay of therapy. Anticoagulants are used in certain conditions of embolic stroke and also in acute stroke for prevention of deep vein thrombosis. Anti-edema measures can be used when there is an increase in the mass effect after the stroke. Sometimes it can increase intracranial pressure. In such conditions, you may need an anti-edema measures. Next slide, please. So you have to understand stroke is a treatable condition, no longer a disabling condition. We should avoid the morbidity. Morbidity is a disability as much as possible. Mortality is there, but it's the second leading cause of death. At least that, if we cannot avoid this, we should at least avoid morbidity or disability. Your interventions are making it very, very rewarding to treat strokes. After all, your satisfaction is only when the patient is improving, not by the money you earn. You have come here only for this, for making the patient better. If you cannot cure, at least relieve the suffering. Early rehabilitation is also very, very essential. Apart from these therapies, you also have to start rehabilitation, physiotherapy or occupational therapy whenever it is needed. So you have to be very alert when you are doing the stroke, and you have to be very fast. Remember, fast. Face, speech, and then what? What is A? F-A-S-T. Face, arm, wrist, speech, and T is time. Okay? Okay, next slide, please. I think I've come to the end of my talk. Eligible patients for thrombolysis may need to negligence and legal complications. Beware, I'm not telling this to make you scared. I'm telling this for you to be safe. Okay? Thank you.
Thank
Is
you.
there any questions? Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay. Any questions? I'm happy to answer. If it's a chat box or if anybody can ask, it's up to you. Can we come to this slide sharing?
1 second, ma'am. Ma'am, in this slide, actually, I didn't understand like which is the vessel and
Okay. What you see, what they have put is as a shunt tube. Okay, that is inserted into the internal carotid artery temporarily.
okay, ma'am.
You can see one end is in the common carotid, other one is the internal carotid artery. Okay.
Okay.
When they are removing the clot, the blood supply has to go to the brain, no?
Oh,
Brain
okay.
cannot be without blood supply for more than 3 minutes. So they are
Okay.
taking out the clot. Once they take out the clot, they will take away that shunt tube and then close the vessel.
Okay.
This is known as carotid endarterectomy
Okay, okay.
or angioplasty. If they're keeping the shunt tube in position, can also be angioplasty. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Is there a chat box?
1 second, ma'am.
I would like to have a feedback.
Ma'am, 1 minute. Rahul,
Yes, Vida, yes.
chat is open for all.
Yeah, chat is open. Open.
Okay.
I have not gone into the routine stroke because that they usually take for you. What are the causes of stroke? 30 different causes of all this, that, multiple, the mitral stenosis, atrial fibrillation, subaqueous bacterial endocarditis, atherosclerosis and all. I thought I should tell you on the management because you're all going to become house surgeons. And this is where you make a difference.
Yeah.
How we manage a same case after 3 hours. Yeah, right. See, till 4.5 hours we can thrombolyze. Suppose you are in a center where the cath lab is available, intra-arterial thrombolysis can be done for about 12 to 24 hours. Or if it's in a better center, you can do all this clot retriever. These devices are available in Chennai and people are doing it also. This Mercy retriever is available. Sometimes they're doing clot retraction with the Mercy receiver also. And see, after 3 to 4.5 hours, if the patient is stable, as I said, the next day, if you are doing thrombolysis, next day you start on aspirin as well as aspirin or clopidogrel antiplatelet along with atorvastatin or rosuvastatin. If the patient has come with a dense stroke, a patient is not in a position to be thrombolized for many reasons. You can have a contraindication for stroke, though the patient has come within the time window. Patient does not have the capacity to buy the thrombolytic therapy. Then you have to go with what is the type of stroke. You can start the patient on earlier aspirin with clopidogrel or individual aspirin. It varies from person to person. Some of them use a combination therapy, some use single therapy along with atorvastatin, little higher dosage, and then you work up for the stroke, find out the cause of the stroke, and then you initiate other therapies as and when needed. Okay, the patient has come after 24 hours and CT scan is not showing. No, I said within the first 24 hours, CT scan can be normal. After that, it can show the infarct. If the patient is coming to you at the end of 7 hours, CT scan is normal. You send the patient for MRI. MRI will show you the diffusion restriction, which will show you the region of infarction. So usually you do that. For thrombolysis, we do not send for MRI because time is very important. Preparation for the MRI and the patient to go get the MRI and the result takes time. That is why I said CT is the first choice. Not only here, that's the guideline also. Have I answered your question?
Hiba?
Have I answered the question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, if the patient has hemorrhagic stroke, depending on the site of hemorrhage, depending on the size of hemorrhage, there are different scores which can be calculated to calculate the volume of the hemorrhage. Suppose it's a cortical stroke, it's very superficial, then a patient sometimes may or may not have deficit. Okay, if it's a cerebellar hemorrhage, then you may have to take up the patient for surgery because the posterior fossa is a place where the cerebellar hemorrhages or cerebellar infarcts can produce an ICT and lead to problems. So you may have to take the patient up for surgery, which could be a VP shunt or aspiration of the blood. Even in certain positions in the brain, the large intracerebral hemorrhage, patient can be taken up for surgery to remove the blood. Certain regions, deep intracerebral hemorrhages, like in the basal ganglia, we may not remove. Depends on the site and the size of hemorrhage to decide whether we are going to intervene in the hemorrhage or only we are going to give physiotherapy and supportive therapy, reduce the BP and manage the patient. Anything else? Okay, acute stroke, why glucose infusion is contraindicated? Because it can worsen the stroke if the sugar goes more than 200. That is why don't give glucose. See, hyperthermia, hyperglycemia can worsen stroke. Hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, hyperthermia can worsen stroke. That is why you don't give glucose infusion. Generally give normal saline and maintain the line if you want to, not glucose. So initial plain CT may not rule out masses. Plain CT is done predominant, as I said, from the history. If you think it is a stroke, acute onset focal neurological problem, first diagnosis will be a stroke. You do a CT scan. The CT is normal or shows infarction, small infarction, then you know it's an ischemic stroke. You go ahead with the thrombolysis. If you are not able to come to a conclusion regarding stroke with the history and with the CT, then you may have to evaluate the patient further. The patient says, I've been having headache for the last 3 to 6 months, the same focal headache. Am I visible in the video? No?
No, ma'am.
You see, I am doing other Zooms where this is a small screen, the speaker is also visible.
Ma'am, you haven't started the video, ma'am.
I haven't started the video, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
None of you told me about that.
Ma'am, we thought you are speaking without video.
No. You can see now. Right.
Yes,
Yes, ma'am. Now we can see.
Okay.
We can see.
Can I see the participants also? You can open up so everybody can be there. Oh, I did not realize that. I'm so sorry. Okay, anyway, the participants can see me now.
Yes, ma'am, I can
Yes,
see.
ma'am. Yes,
Okay.
we can-
Suppose there's a focal pain in one region of the brain. Okay. And the headache is there for 3 to 6 months. Is this FIDA I'm seeing here?
Yes, ma'am.
Not all the other participants.
Ma'am, everyone might not be in a comfortable position.
Okay, leave it. No, whoever is on the video can come if they want to.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, I leave it to you. Okay, anyway, if the patient complains of focal headache which has been going on for 3 to 6 months, and then the headache is slowly increasing, has now developed signs of vomiting, develops a hemiparesis, I may not consider it as a stroke. I will consider there's a mass lesion, and I may ask for a plain and a contrast CT scan, or I may go ahead with an MRI. But if the patient has nothing else, was doing all well, suddenly in the office he was working, he developed weakness and he fell down. I would consider that as a stroke and go ahead with the plain CT. As I said, neurology is very, very important. It's a history taking and the physical examination rather than investigation. Okay, investigation comes in only after you have taken a proper history and decided how we are going to proceed. You have to have a differential diagnosis. If the patient complains of severe headache and developed an hemiparesis, sudden severe headache and developed an hemiparesis, what are the conditions can occur? This can occur in a subarachnoid hemorrhage, can occur in the intracerebral hemorrhage, can occur in migraine. It can occur in an acute stroke also. Okay. So for this, hemorrhages are better picked up in the CT than in the MRI. So you do a CT scan first. Then you do, if you find an hemorrhage, you have to treat the hemorrhage. Do not find an hemorrhage and no infarction, then you assume it is stroke and you treat the patient as stroke. Patient improves within 24 to 48 hours. The headache also goes. Then you may have to decide whether this is a migraine or this is a stroke, hemiplegic migraine or stroke. For hemiplegic migraine, there is a set of criteria which has to be fulfilled to call it as hemiplegic migraine. I am not going into all those because they are very advanced. You will only remember that and you will forget the basics. So it always depends on the history, associated symptoms and signs, not just on one. Okay, patient has developed a seizure, suddenly patient fell down with a focal seizure, has developed hemiparesis on the same side, has got up within 3 minutes. No hemiparesis. Is this Stotz palsy? This is TIA. In TIA, to develop these seizures are very uncommon. Okay, so probably it's a Stotz palsy. Even then, you get a scan done, CT scan done to rule out whether it's hemorrhage, intracerebral hemorrhage. Because cerebral hemorrhages can produce seizures and hemiparesis. So you have to rule out. As I said, the symptom complex is very, very important. That is why history taking is important. Neurological examination takes much longer than the cardiovascular examination, where just is auscultation in 4 or 5 places. Here it is much more than that. Yes, any other questions there? 1 second. I'm just going to hemorrhagic stroke. I've done. Why glucose infusion? I've done. CT initially is done. Hemorrhage. Yeah, I've done that. What can be done in resource poor setting? Now, even if the resource poor, government is giving thrombolysis free of cost to hospitals, government hospitals. So if the resource setting is poor, patient can still go to a government hospital where thrombolysis is available. Only thing is you have to have the expertise to do this. You can always contact your hospital neurologist over phone to take a decision, but you should have a good team in place to do it properly. See, the one first, it starts with the casualty where the ambulance, when the call comes and the ambulance goes, 108, somebody calls from home. The ambulance driver should be familiar that it's a stroke. He has to go and come fast with the siren blaring. Second thing, it should be received fast in the casualty, not waiting in the queue. Third thing is, once you decide it's a stroke, you have to inform the radiologist, send the patient for CT scan. Before that, take the blood. As soon as you decide to stroke, take the blood, inform the radiologist, ask them to be ready, send the patient for CT scan. And the CT scan can be completed within 10 minutes. And the patient can come back to casualty. By then, you will do an ECG. By the time it's about 25 to 40 minutes, it will be over. You get the blood report, get the CT scan, and whether with your physician or with a neurologist, you have to decide whether you're going to go ahead with the thrombolysis or not. Few things. If suppose patient refuses thrombolysis, okay, fine, don't force them. You tell them that 3 to 8% chance of angioedema and 8% chance of intracerebral hemorrhage. Patient say, no, I don't want it. Okay, fine. Then you start the patient on aspirin, clopidogrel and atorvastatin and all the other supportive therapy, depending on hypertension or diabetes. Okay? Not all patients agree for thrombolysis. Yes? Any more questions? Yes, I was sitting. Do we need to continue with platelet therapy to prevent recurrent stroke? Yes, yes, definitely. The antiplatelet therapy may have to be continued lifelong provided there is no contraindication. Sometimes with the antiplatelet therapy, patients may develop GI hemorrhage. In that condition, you can stop it for a short while and then restart it. Okay, sometimes they'll have to undergo some surgical procedures for which you may stop it and then restart it. But antiplatelet therapy will have to be continued lifelong in a ischemic stroke patient. Anything else? Okay, should we need to do thrombolysis within 3 hours of onset of symptom or within 3 hours after coming to the hospital? Within 3 to 4.5 hours of onset of symptoms. Within 1 hour of coming into the hospital as far as possible, don't delay it. Ideal time nowadays is about 30 to 45 minutes. Within 4.5 hours of symptom onset. That is why I spoke about wake up strokes. Patient has gone to bed at 10 o'clock, gets up at 6:30 with a stroke, you don't know the onset. Suppose patient has gone to bed at 10 o'clock, got up at 4 o'clock to pass urine, comes back and sleeps, 6:30 gets up with a stroke, then you know the onset could have been in the last, so you have to take the last time patient was seen well. So that is 4 o'clock. So you have to take it as 2.5 hours. And even then you have another 2 hours to do thrombolysis, provided the patient fulfills the criteria for thrombolysis. Yeah? If hemorrhagic stroke and the patient survives the first episode, how can we prevent further episodes of stroke? Okay. So it depends on the cause for the hemorrhagic stroke. The common cause is hypertension. You have to keep the hypertension under control. There are lots of risk factors, so you have to warn the patient. Like I showed you in the CT scan, there is microhemorrhages are there. Those patients, depending on the site and the number of microhemorrhages, can go in for hemorrhagic stroke. You have to give them appropriate therapy. So what will that mean? If the patient has hypertension, hyperlipidemia, diabetes, you have to keep all that under control. Stop alcohol use. If patient is taking any substance abuse, whether it can also produce stroke, all those will have to be stopped. Alter the lifestyle management, alter the food, ask them to exercise, maintain their BP well. Most of the times you can prevent, otherwise nothing specific to prevent. Anything we can do for patients who present late after 4.5 hours? Yes. So that depends on the hospital. As I said, 4.5 hours to 24 hours, intra-arterial thrombolysis or thrombectomy can be done. For that, you need a good setup with a cath lab and a person who is competent in putting in the catheter and doing an angiography. Then you can go in for other therapies. If all those are not available, then only aspirin and atorvastatin. Aspirin or clopidogrel and atorvastatin. Depends on the setup.
Ma'am?
Yeah?
Ma'am, I have a doubt, ma'am.
Who's speaking? Just tell me your name.
Ma'am, Tarun, ma'am.
Okay, yeah, tell me, Tarun.
Ma'am, what if a pre-existing platelet plaque, ma'am? If a patient has a platelet plaque, ma'am, in a coronary arteries, ma'am, what if after undergoing thrombolysis, is there any chance of developing a chronic unstable angina, ma'am?
No, see, this thrombolysis will also be helpful for that, See, actually now, we are also using tenecteplase,
Yes,
which
ma'am.
is a drug which is used in acute myocardial infarction, which can also be used in stroke. I did not talk about it because it can lead to confusion. The dose they use is 0.4, the dose we neurologists use 0.24. So the same drug can be used in both the places. And if the patient has a cerebrovascular disease, his coronaries also most of the times will be affected. When they have a coronary disease, the cerebral blood vessels also will be affected. May or may not be symptomatic. Because most of the times the same etiology will play in both the vessels. It's not going to affect only one vessel, leave the rest of the vessels free.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am,
Okay.
ma'am, I'm saying that thrombolysis itself is a contraindication unstable angina, ma'am, because thrombolysis can lead to occlusion of small vessels, ma'am.
Occlusion of small vessels. See, as far as neurology thrombolysis is concerned, intracerebral hemorrhage is one problem. Second thing is breaking up of the clot. In cardiology, we do not have unstable anginas as contraindication for thrombolysis. It is contraindicated as a cardiologist before you do a thrombolysis. I am not sure about this unstable angina in cardiology.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Anybody speak up? I'm here. That's it. Over. Anything specific or over? Who's in? Ray Mori. Yeah. Please speak up. What's happening? Okay, I think I have already told you about anticoagulation. Role of anticoagulation is mainly for preventing the deep vein thrombosis in stroke. Okay, otherwise we don't use anticoagulation. So some of the old timers use heparin for posterior circulation stroke. How do we manage embolic stroke? You have to find out the cause and treat the cause. The cardioembolic stroke, then you have to involve the cardiologist. The left atrial clot is there, you may have to isolate the left atrium and then prevent further embolic occurrence. In embolic strokes, anticoagulation is useful, but not in thrombotic strokes. As I said, anticoagulation is useful in embolic strokes. How do we, and that too, it depends on the site of hemorrhage. Site of embolism. How do we manage embolic stroke? Yeah, it depends on the site of embolism. Your management is going to vary. If the patient has a DVT and the patent ductal arteriosis, then patient can develop embolic stroke. So you have to give anticoagulation. Patient has a subacute bacterial endocarditis and develops a stroke, then you may have to find out the cause of subacute bacterial endocarditis, whether it's infective or non-infective, and use the appropriate therapy for that. Right? Shall we call it a day? I'll give you my numbers. If you need anything, you can message me. Okay? I think otherwise Frida has got my number and my mail.
I'll send it to them now.
I think something is coming. Okay. So anything you can let me know. You want further neurology, anything specific, you let me know. I may need some help on uploading videos. So I've got lots of videos regarding movement disorders, gait, speech and all that. Those things you have to see it as a video. So I'll need some help from one of you. You can volunteer, I can do that.
Ma'am, I'll contact you about that.
Yeah. Yes?
Okay, ma'am.
Bye-bye to all of you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Keep up the KMC name. KMC flag should fly high, higher than MMC.
Sure.
Though I'm alumni of both. Okay? KMC should fly high. People should choose KMC, not go for MMC. Undergraduation, KMC is the best, not MMC. Post-graduation, MMC is good. So don't feel bad you're not in MMC. You're much better off in KMC than in MMC. I've seen both the places. Okay?
Yeah, ma'am.
Right.
Okay.
Feel proud to be in KMC. Have the KMC spirit. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye, ma'am.
Yeah. Log
Thank
me
you,
out.
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Nice of you all. Make me feel young.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you. Thank you.